Before starting this video, I have a few disclaimers. First of all, everything I say in this video is my opinion. Don't bash me if you disagree. Secondly, this video was more about character design, not gameplay. Finally, special thanks to my friend Jack for recording a lot of the Street Fighter gameplay, because I really suck at those games. If in the background you see a player getting demolished, it's probably my gameplay. Anyway, on with the video. Putting together a fighting game roster is hard. I mean, look at Nintendo. Reggie just said, fuck it, put every video game character ever in Smash. And they did. I firmly believe that a fighting game is only as good as its roster. When you first go to play a game, that roster is the first thing you'll see. A new player won't know the gameplay styles of any of these characters, so they just go off of the character alone when choosing who to play. As someone who has been playing fighting games for years, the actual character is still a major factor in picking the character I want to play. Every player, whether they're a new or seasoned veteran, should at least have one character who they can identify with. For every fighting game, a great roster is essential for every player to have an enjoyable experience. But what defines a great roster? I think a great roster comes from three things. A balance between returning classic characters and new interesting characters and/or wildcard additions, as well as a great overall character design. Since character design is the first thing a new player looks at when choosing a character, let's start there. When I was a young lad and I bought Mortal Kombat 9, I had no idea who any of these weirdos were or how they played. Zoning, rushdown, footsies, I didn't know any of that. I mainly played Smoke in Mortal Kombat 9. I didn't choose him because of his combos or gameplay style. I was just looking through the character select screen and I thought, that guy looks cool! And the rest is history. Character design is incredibly important because that's how they're initially represented. Especially for new IPs without established classic characters, who need to make sure that all their game's characters look appealing to their players. Great character design should tell you everything you need to know about a character from a glance. Just looking at them should give you an idea of their personality and maybe even a bit of their backstory. An example of a game with fantastic character design is Street Fighter III Third Strike. A really well-designed character in this game is Q, a man shrouded in mystery. He appears at murder sites all around the world, and the authorities don't know if he's friend or foe. Q is the ultimate man of mystery, and this is shown through his character design. In homage to classic noir, Q is outfitted in a long trench coat, dress pants, shirt and tie, and a fedora, all staple clothing items of classic noir characters. Q's distinguishing feature is his expressionless metal mask, which conceals his identity. Q's entire look complements his mysterious aura, effectively giving any player a basic idea what this guy is all about just by looking at him. Another really well-designed character in Third Strike is Elena. Elena is a princess from an East African nation who travels the world as a martial artist. She practices, and I'm sorry if I butcher the pronunciation of this, capoeira, an African-Brazilian dance-like martial art that focuses mainly on kicks. Elena's personality, heritage, and fighting style are all conveyed through her character design. Her white, underwear creates heavy contrast with her dark skin, creating focus on her extremely long legs. Elena is also modeled with very large feet, highlighting her kick-based moveset. She wears many multicolored bands around her neck, arms, and legs, which both reference her colorful and lighthearted personality, as well as her African roots, as many women in East African countries such as Kenya wear similar jewelry. The design of Q and Elena tell the player everything they need to know about them just from a look. All characters in fighting games should be designed with this philosophy in mind. Time to discuss number 2. Returning classic characters. I think every fighting game should have a balance between these returning classic characters and new characters. Not necessarily 50-50, but a ratio where each category has enough representation. There's a lot of big fighting game franchises out there with their own iconic characters. When a new installment in that franchise begins development, the developers need to choose a limited amount of their massive lineup of their iconic characters to include in the game. To illustrate this, let's look at Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance and Deception. No, their rosters aren't perfect. Most of their new characters are extremely lackluster, but I like a lot of them, so shut up. But the way these games handle returning characters is perfect. First, let's look at Deadly Alliance. The game's roster includes 23 playable characters, 10 of which are new, leaving 13 returning characters in the roster. I think this provides a great balance between old and new. At the time of Deadly Alliance's release, there hadn't been a new Mortal Kombat game in 5 years. So, Midway decided to put their most iconic characters in the game first, as Deadly Alliance was essentially a new start to the franchise on a new console generation. 6 out of the 7 original characters from the original Mortal Kombat returned, including Scorpion, Sub-Zero, Raiden, Sonya Blade, Johnny Cage, and Kano. Where's Liu Kang, you ask? Well, he's fucking dead. Killing off Liu Kang was a great move, considering he had been the main hero for 4 games in a row and was starting to become stale. Deadly Alliance's lack of Liu Kang automatically made the roster more interesting, causing it to stand out from the rest of the MK games. Liu's absence left a spot open for a different character to get the spotlight. The returning cast is rounded out by main villains Shang Tsung and Quan Chi, Reptile, Jax, Cyrax, Kitana, and Kung Lao, all of whom are some of the most iconic characters in the MK franchise. Moving into Deception, which has a roster of technically 24 playable characters. Only 8 are new, while the other 16 are returning. The ratio between old and new is a little lopsided, but it isn't terrible. Midway brought back the most successful new characters from Deadly Alliance, including Kenshi, Li Mei, and Bo Rai Cho for whatever reason. Since all the most iconic characters returned again for Deadly Alliance after being in nearly every previous game, Midway made the smart decision to have them sit Deception out. Instead, Deception's returning cast features the rest of the iconic characters from the original Mortal Kombat trilogy who didn't return for Deadly Alliance, finally giving them the spotlight for the first time in almost a decade. These returning characters include Scorpion, Sub-Zero, and Raiden, because these 3 are basically mandatory in every Mortal Kombat game, as well as Jade, Sindel, Baraka, Cabal, Ermac, Melina, Nightwolf, Tanya, a Noob Smoke tag team, and even a zombified Liu Kang. Liu Kang's return not as himself, but as a zombie, made Deception's roster stand out even more. Seeing a Mortal Kombat game without the likes of Sonya and Johnny Cage was extremely rare, so having a game be led by lesser characters such as Jade and Cabal was entirely fresh. Bringing back a franchise's classic characters in a new installment is a given, but it's up to the developers to know when a character is getting stale and if they should sit out a game. Midway recognized that Sonya, Johnny, and Kung Lao have been appearing in every game, so they were given a rest, allowing other characters to get a chance in the limelight. On the flip side of these classic characters, there are of course the new additions, which leads us into number 3. New Wildcard characters. In a long-running fighting game franchise, the developers can't just recycle the same cast every game. Each installment must include some new characters to freshen up the roster. Take risks with them. Throw in some wildcards the fans would never expect. A franchise which always used to excel at this was Marvel vs. Capcom. The Marvel vs. Capcom games featured massive diverse rosters of characters from both Capcom titles as well as from Marvel Comics. Going into Marvel vs. Capcom 2, there were characters you would expect to appear, including Ryu, Wolverine, Chun-Li, Mega Man, Captain America, Jill Valentine, and Iron Man.
Fuck you, Iron Man!
However, many of the new characters in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 came completely out of nowhere. You had Marrow from the X-Men, someone named Captain Commando, whatever the fuck a Mingo is supposed to be, Spiral. Spiral? Really? Spiral. Spiral. Okay, Capcom. Sun? I honestly have no idea who this is. And Shumagorath. I've read comics with Shumagorath, and I still don't know who he is. Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 took the same approach with its roster. The game had many of the characters you'd expect to return, like Ryu, Wolverine, Chun-Li, Spider-Man, and Iron Man.
Fuck you, Iron Man!
As well as new characters who, while exciting, aren't entirely surprising. These include characters like Chris Redfield, Deadpool, Dante, and Phoenix. However, you can be sure they brought in those wildcard characters that no one saw coming. This game's got Spencer from a game I've never heard of. The game's got MODOK. That's all I really have to say about MODOK. I mean, come on, it's MODOK. Is that Arthur from Ghosts and Goblins for the NES? What do you think I am, Capcom? 90 years old? You really think I played that game? Whoa, they got the Sega Nemesis. How'd they get that guy in here? What? X-23? In the same game as Wolverine? Okay, I'll take it. I don't... Who is this guy? They even brought in Rocket Raccoon. Although everyone in their tree knows who Rocket Raccoon is now, this game came out in 2011, years before Guardians of the Galaxy released. No one knew who Rocket was back then. The majority of the roster was made up of new characters, most of those being wildcards who no one expected to be in the game. Capcom's approach to constantly introducing WTF new characters every game led to each installment in this franchise having an incredibly fresh roster, mostly, despite many of the same characters returning for every title. Since we're looking at examples of great rosters, or at least rosters with great elements, let's look at some rosters which are all around fairly weak, starting with Mortal Kombat X. Now, I don't hate Mortal Kombat X's roster, but I do think of it as disappointing. I'll give it some credit though. The game has a roster size of 24 characters, 16 of those being returning characters, and 8 of them being entirely new. The ratio isn't amazing, but it's definitely pretty good. Most of the new characters have pretty interesting designs, mostly, but where they fall short is in story mode. All of MKX's new additions either just have no character, are absurdly stupid, or are just fucking annoying.
Resistance might be more possible than you think.
Don't sweat it. It comes to that, Sub-Zero won't know what hit him.
Shut the fuck up, Cassie! The new characters aren't terrible, but they're pretty bland for the most part. I appreciate that NetherRealm took risks with some of these guys, so it ultimately edged just a little towards thinking positively of the new characters overall. Where Mortal Kombat X completely falls on its face is with returning characters. Scorpion, Sub-Zero, and Raiden obviously return, but most of the returning cast have become extremely stale. There's Sonya Blade, Johnny Cage, Kano, Jax, Liu Kang, Kung Lao, etc. We've seen these characters over and over and over and over again in most, if not every single Mortal Kombat game in which they're always given the spotlight. MKX should have been another Mortal Kombat deception, giving characters who haven't had the spotlight in over a decade time to shine, such as Noob and Smoke, or even Rain, Serena, Frost, Fujin, and Li Mei. Those last few were in the game as unplayable NPCs. Come on, Nintendo, what are you trying to pull here? The designs of the returning characters were also a notable disappointment. I think the most egregious example would be Johnny Cage. Johnny is a full of himself attention whore and martial artist. His design in the older games capture this perfectly. In Deadly Alliance, Johnny goes shirtless to show off his muscles. The primary color of blue pops and brings attention to himself. His taped hands and feet point to his history as a martial artist, and his sunglasses, which he always wears, implies his cocky attitude. Now let's look at how Johnny looks in Mortal Kombat X. What the fuck is this? This is just some generic military outfit. Nothing about either of Johnny Cage's new designs depicts his character and personality in any way. For some reason, these personality-less designs infected many of the returning cast members. MKX's returning roster wasn't the worst thing in the world, but it was filled with characters who really needed a break. Kenshi and Shinnok returned for their first time in years as member of the base roster, and DLC featured the return of Bo' Rai Cho and Hanya, who haven't been featured in MK in over a decade. While these characters did help diversify the returning cast, they didn't completely prevent MKX's roster from feeling like a wet towel. Speaking of DLC, the most controversial aspect of MKX's roster was the absurd amount of guest characters. The game's DLC featured four guest characters, including Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th, the Predator, Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the Xenomorph from the Alien franchise. To be honest, I actually really enjoy these characters. It's super exciting to me to see some of my favorite horror icons go head to head with my favorite Mortal Kombat characters. Scorpion vs. the Predator was a dream of mine long before MKX's release. However, with 4 of the 9 DLC characters being guests, they take up slots that could have been filled by another Mortal Kombat character. I think these 4 guests are all great fits into the world of Mortal Kombat, but we don't need all 4 at once in the same game. If you just keep 2 of them and lose the 2 others, you open up slots for 2 MK characters, such as a Fujin or Li Mei, who haven't been given the spotlight in over a decade. Overall, I don't hate Mortal Kombat X's roster, but it certainly leaves a lot to be desired. Although, there is one game whose roster I hate. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite's roster is ultra mega ass.
You tripping, bro. You tripping.
It seriously baffles me how this franchise, which had some of the best fighting game rosters of all time, could put out this offensively bland and forgettable lineup of characters. You, of course, have the expected characters returning. These include Ryu, Spider-Man, Chun-Li, Captain America, Morrigan, and Iron Man.
Fuck you, Iron Man.
There isn't anything necessarily wrong with bringing back these specific classic characters, but there are some glaring omissions. In Disney's feud with 20th Century Fox, all X-Men and Fantastic Four characters are banned from being included in the game. That's right, Marvel vs. Capcom mainstays like Storm, Dr. Doom, Magneto, and Wolverine. Wolverine, one of the biggest comic book superheroes of all time, who has appeared in every Marvel vs. Capcom title since the beginning, isn't in this game. Hell, the entire Marvel vs. Capcom franchise started with an X-Men fighting game called X-Men Children of the Atom in 1994. The characters who started this legendary series weren't even allowed in the most recent installment. Outside of the omission of the X-Men and Fantastic Four characters, the roster is made up of 30 characters, only 10 of those being new. While Infinite may have brought back characters who I considered wildcards back in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, their novelty has entirely worn off. We all know who Rocket Raccoon is now. Spencer has gone from interesting to just lame. I still don't know who this guy is. And I still haven't played Ghosts and Goblins, Capcom. Wow, Chris Redfield and Nemesis are back. There are no other great Resident Evil characters and creatures who would make great inclusions in this game. These fighters who used to be wildcard characters are just boring, and no new wildcard characters were added either. So, who does this game feature as their brand new wildcard characters? Wow, Black Panther from those really popular movies. Wow, Winter Soldier from those really popular movies. Wow, Black Widow from those really popular movies. Wow, Captain Marvel from that really popular movie. Wow, Gamora from those really popular movies. Wow, X from those really popular and classic video games. Wow, Ultron from that really popular movie. Wow, Monster Hunter from that really popular video game. Wow. Okay, I actually don't know who this is. The roster from Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite is seriously lacking in every area. New characters, returning characters, and everything else. It's unacceptably bland and borderline offensive. With the recent Disney-Fox merger, we're starting to see the X-Men pop up in video games again. Hopefully, we'll see the Marvelous Mutants make their grand return in a future Marvel vs. Capcom title. Let's lighten the mood. What are some rosters that I think are great? Well, Dragon Ball FighterZ is pretty great. Since FighterZ is based on an existing franchise, there aren't any entirely new characters outside of the fantastic Android 21. However, the game has plenty of characters the fans wouldn't expect, leading to a great balance between expected characters and wildcards. There are plenty of characters fans would expect, like Goku, Vegeta, Krillin, Piccolo, Frieza, and Cell. But there are many characters fans would expect to be in the game that are just absent, like Chi-Chi, Master Roshi, Kefla, Raditz, and maybe even a playable version of Bulma somehow. Instead of them, this game includes wildcards like Captain Ginyu, 2 different Gohans, and Bardock. Cooler and Broly? Those 2 weren't even canon. Oh wait, is that the Roswell incident alien? How'd Bandai get the rights to that guy? Videl, the girl who could barely even fly? What? Her projectile is just throwing Gohan at you? 10 out of 10. Best character. 10 out of 10. Really, my only problem with FighterZ's roster is that it has way too many different flavors of Goku. There's lemon, strawberry, blueberry, Goku Vegeta swirl, and he even comes in small size. Too much of the roster is taken up by different versions of the same character. That being said, Dragon Ball FighterZ has a great balance of expected characters and surprise additions, making it fantastic. With a few tweaks, it would be the ideal fighting game roster. But does the ideal fighting game roster exist? I'd argue that title goes to Street Fighter Alpha 3. It's a masterpiece! Mwah, it's a masterpiece! Street Fighter Alpha 3 brings back the entire roster from Street Fighter Alphas 1 and 2, along with a few new additions for a total of 28 playable characters. To be fair, Alpha 3 only has 4 entirely new playable characters, including Armika, Karen, Julie, and Junie. However, the previous Alpha games introduced new characters, who are all brought back for Alpha 3. These include Dan, and fan favorites such as Sakura, Rose, and Charlie Nash. The previous Alpha games also had many unplayable NPCs make their playable debuts, including Birdie, Gen, and Adon from the original Street Fighter, as well as Guy, Rolento, Sodom, and Cody from Final Fight. All these new playable characters were still fresh by the time Alpha 3 released, so I still consider them as new when comparing returning fighters to new faces. That being said, there are many returning favorites from the Street Fighter 2 sub-series, including Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Akuma, M. Bison, Sagat, Zangief, and Dhalsim for Alpha 1 and 2, as well as Balrog, Blanca, Vega, Cammy, and E. Honda returning for their first time for Alpha 3. Overall, there are 13 returning fighters alongside 15 new characters. It's not exactly 50-50, but it's extremely close. This roster has a near pitch-perfect balance between the old and new. Every single character even has a fantastic design, giving the player insight into all the characters and their personality. Street Fighter Alpha 3 is one of, if not the greatest fighting game roster of all time, and is something all fighting games should strive to achieve. Good thing the Street Fighter franchise will continue to have great rosters. Oh wait. For a fighting game roster to be fresh and diverse, the balance between old favorites and new additions are essential. Bringing back the same fighters over and over and over gets boring, causing players to lose interest. The universes of these fighting games are filled with so many interesting characters and stories, all deserving of their own spotlight, while still leaving plenty of room for more new interesting characters and stories. Don't only recycle what the fans already know. Take risks, surprise us. Even if the new fighters aren't as interesting as what came before, at least the game will stand out with a fresh roster. Every player deserves to find a character who they can identify with. Mixing up your game roster with each installment will give everyone a chance to find a fighter who they enjoy.